Yeah.
Okay.
So this is really a pleasure today. As our audiences knows that Tabari Khwani is a forum that is literally meaning of recitation of history. So we are not just confined to history, but we invite authors, scholars, and coming up from the different walks of the life. So today we have Professor Neerja with her here on our forum, and just a minute, I would like to give only a minute for introducing Professor Neerja. So,
Yes.
prof- yeah, just 1 minute.
अजय तस्वीर आणि bad light and terrible.
Sorry for the interruption.
No,
So, Professor Neerja is an eminent writer, teacher, and a translator who taught in Kashmir for over more than 3 decades. She has published 5 books, and most recent being is a critically acclaimed book. And I was talking with her just before coming live on this session, "The Mystic and a Lyric: 4 women poets from Kashmir." We'll just before going to our work, we'll just ask about this work also. And her work has been published by Sahitya Academy and awarded a fellowship and visitorship to the Oxford Ministry of Education and British Council. She used to live on a very beautiful place that, from my sense, is a paradise of India, coming to its natural beauty. She lives in Srinagar, Kashmir. So, Prof. Neerja, you want to add any word to this humble introduction?
no, you have said more than enough. You have highlighted the main features that I taught English, and also that I have done this book and I have done other translations, and also the fact that I am one of the very few Kashmiri Pandit families who still live in Kashmir, who haven't left in spite of whatever is happening. We have
Exactly.
our faith in the people of Kashmir, so we continue to live here. That's all I can add.
So, Prof, the greatest Kashmiri stories. So, ever told. How this title was selected, and what was the basis of this selection, and what exactly this book is made up of?
Actually, the title was not selected by me. The LF, the publishers, they
Yeah,
had brought out a series of books on the greatest Urdu stories ever written, the greatest Assamese stories ever written, Tamil stories ever written. The greatest was their thing. I don't know. I mean, I had to follow that line. So the book was called The Greatest Kashmiri Stories Ever Written. But in my mind, I'm not a judge, but I chose the best that was possible. And I also wanted to let people know that Kashmiri short story writers are your best guide to understand Kashmiri psyche. Right from, because you see, this short story form was introduced in Kashmiri in the late 40s. Till then, of course, other kinds of writings were being written and published and everything, but short story came rather late, in the middle of the 20th last century. And then they reflected various stages in the history and the politics and the socio-economic situations in Kashmir from the 50s to the present times. So if you want a really a kind of a guide to understanding contemporary Kashmiri history and the story of its society and the way people think and the way people's aspirations are sometimes fulfilled, sometimes not fulfilled. I mean, the stories are a reflection of everything that happens to Kashmiris. And it is a varied tapestry. You can see some are stories of hope, some are stories of disappointment, some are stories which kind of psychologically analysis the springs of human emotions and things. And I've tried to get the best, and also I wanted it to go from 1948 down to the present 2021, and that was my you see scheme of things. And the book has been received well. The rest it's for you to ask me.
yeah, no, definitely, definitely. Each and every chapter and each and every, first of all, the work of the translation itself carries a very rich, I would like to say, the narratives and the work done by the translator. This is really, and from the language that doesn't have access in the larger societies. Like, I would like to say the Kashmiri is a beautiful language, but People like us are unfortunate who don't understand the language. So this
That
is
is
really
actually
great work that you bridges
no.
us with the culture.
I wanted to tell you actually one of the motivations for this work of mine is to make people aware that Kashmiri is a rich language and we
Yes,
have a history of literature from the 14th century onwards. Because you see, sometimes I'm so surprised about people's ignorance. So
right.
actually, when I got my first book published of Kashmiri short stories, the title was "The Stranger Beside Me." It was actually the title of a short story, but I thought that it was most appropriate because the rest of the mainland India really didn't understand Kashmir, didn't understand Kashmir or the Kashmiri people. They judged them from their own standard. So I thought that it's necessary to introduce this stranger who is beside them, yet they don't quite understand. So I thought it would be an appropriate title for my first collection. And I'm glad that the book was read and people became aware of this rich tradition. And then I wrote this mystic and the lyric so that they would know about the richness of Kashmiri poetry and also how women in Kashmir have always spoken out frankly, freely, without fear. And they have been the original rebels, I would call them, because I think they were proto feminists in the sense that they exposed the situation in which they lived, and also they raised their voice against injustice also, and they were confident voices. So my main purpose was to dispel this funny kind of distorted versions of Kashmir and Kashmiris. And so I'm glad people are reading these books. That's my It's a kind of my humble contribution to my motherland, and I'm happy that people have received these books well. I hope it answers your question. I can't
I
hear
was
you.
mute. Yeah, I was mute. I was mute. Sorry. So
Okay.
now you can hear me. What I'm saying that I'm not diverting from the topic, but my next question is coming up because you are talking about the role of the female in the Kashmiri society, the women poets, and you have other work, very beautiful work, Mystic and the Lyric, for women poets from Kashmir. Little bit outlined because somehow it is connected to the work of the translation. So that's why
Mhm.
I just ask a permission for this question.
Oh, no, that's all right. You see, I was telling you, but of course,
Yeah.
that is before we went on.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
see, these are four women poets from four different centuries. And also, the most important thing about them is that they are the founders of the main streams of Kashmiri poetry, which began in the 14th century. Is rich. It's a rich kind of a treasure house of what shall I say, poetry, which comes up to the present times. And the two main streams, the mystic and the lyric stream, were both founded by women. Lal Ded in the 14th century was our first mystic poet because you see, she was steeped in Shaivite philosophy. Kashmir Shaivism is a slightly different form of Shaivism, and it's also called the Trika Shastra. And Lal Ded was steeped in it, but she is the one who did a remarkable thing. Till then, it was confined to the Brahmins and the Sanskrit knowing scholars. She brought it out of those closets of Brahmanism and used these to explain all this philosophy in the language of the common people in Kashmiri so that it became accessible to everyone. And she is the one who founded this mystic stream, which is a very rich stream which continues till today in Kashmiri poetry. And these mystic poets in Kashmir, the men and women also, you can see that they are above narrowness of prejudice or anything. They are a kind of a syncretic voice. They borrow similes and metaphors from all religions. And the other stream, that is the romantic lyric stream, which is also a wonderful stream which is flourishing till today. was also founded by a woman in the 16th century, Habba Khatun. She's the one who wrote the romantic lyric, and this tradition was followed by others. The mystic tradition was followed by Rup Bhavani in the 17th century, and the romantic, founded by Habba Khatun in the 16th century, was followed by Arnimal in the 18th century. So this was my plan, that let people know the kind of powerful voices that Kashmiri women have always had, and how they have spoken boldly, how they are unafraid, and they have exposed the lyrical poets have exposed the cruelties of the system which they had to suffer from. So in that sense, I think they were like proto feminists. So this was my idea, and then I introduced them. I write a little bit of a life sketch, including the myths that surround them, and then I also translated their work. The Mystic and the Lyric is that book, which contains these four great women poets of Kashmir.
This thank you for such an elaborative answer. Now coming back to our own title today, the greatest Kashmiri stories. It started with the first story, that is reply paid card by Dinanath Nadim, and it ended with the search of Dheeba Nazir, and
Yes,
it's
it ends
collection
with
of
this.
25 stories, I think. This collection
Yes.
of 25 stories that beautifully knitted with the different time and different things. So can we start from the story which you would like to tell us that depict the older days of the Kashmir, or something that from the one of the, we say, the historical aspect of the fiction, and then we'll
Okay,
come to the
reply.
contemporary times.
I'll start with the reply paid card.
Yeah,
Because you
that's
see,
good. Yeah, that's
in
great. Yes.
1947, when India got its independence, Kashmir was in a bit of an undecided state, and then
Yes.
it was invaded by tribal, you see, marauders backed
Yeah.
by the Pakistan army, and it created such a terrible kind of a situation for Kashmiris that they rose in one voice, and they said that they have to push back these invaders. And this was irrespective of religion or everything. All the population arose. They had slogans which they used to shout. They also started a defense corps, a men's militia plus a women's self-defense corps, in which the women got trained in arms use. And these women, I must tell you, came from all communities. Kashmiri Pandits, Muslims, outsiders. There was one British lady who used to live here, Reda Bedi, she was there. There were the Kashmiri milk seller's daughter, Zoon Gujri was her name. All of them together went for this arms training. So this reply paid card actually is a reflection of that time. That there is this person whose son has gone to fight the invaders, and she sends him a letter hoping that she will receive a reply, because those days there used to be a postcard which you could call a reply paid card, which the younger today's generation doesn't know it. But then it was expected that the person who received the postcard would be able to send a reply without having to buy a card or pay any stamp or anything. So she waits for her son's reply paid card, but instead she gets the news that he's dead. And instead of mourning for him, she decides to take up arms herself and go and fight. So this was a reflection of the mood of the people at that time. So if you want to know the history of Kashmir from 47 onwards, you can begin with the reply paid card, because it tells you about the passion that Kashmiris had to defend their homeland against invaders, and irrespective of gender, irrespective of class and society, they all rose as one united front. And then you see that the people had hopes, they had aspirations, and you see they were the beginning. In the beginning, the stories reflect the miserable condition of Kashmiris who were oppressed, who were, you see, almost destitute, and they had no voice. But the stories tell you about their gradual transformation in the sense that they thought that things would become better. So these are stories now. The next kind of bunch of stories reflect the poverty and the misery of the Kashmiris, but also they have a tinge of hope that things are going to change. But then soon, when things don't change and the unsettledness continues, then you find more reflective short stories. And like which one should I mention? You see, in the first category comes the first couple of stories by Dinanath Nadim and
I think
Somnath Zutshi.
about Somnath Zutshi's story. I think when the light dawned,
They have when the light dawned. This is
light
a
dawned.
reflection of
The
how the
continuation of
destitute suddenly feel that they can do anything now. The future will be bright and everything. But then you see the destitute remain destitute in the strange mohalla, in the story of paper tigers. And again, you see, it seems that no matter how much things change, they really don't change much. And then you go on to see that you see disillusionment that has come in, and then there are certain stories which are a bit philosophical, which seem to avoid the grim reality and go into the philosophical kind of uh, what shall I say, thoughtfulness, like this Akhtar Mohideen's story, "Man is of a Strange Breed." And then you also have stories which probe deeper into the psychology of men and women. You have this story, The Stranger Beside Me, which is a very almost a surrealistic story, experimental, but very, very profound because it talks about how you see what can happen in a state of regimentation. And then there are also stories of humor that Kashmiris, in spite of everything, can find something to laugh about. So there is this story of The Boy is Guilty by Nazir Jahangir. And then there is also the story of the division of Kashmir between the part held by India and the part held by Pakistan. How at one time it was one state, but how the two brothers are separated and the terrible suffering that they undergo because they can't see each other. If they make an effort to see each other, it can be very dangerous, can have dangerous consequences. And then also there are stories which talk about the what shall I say, the drifters in society who don't seem to have much hope, who only, for them, the only, like the Mourners by Hari Kishan Kaul, in which the only comfort that these uneducated drifters derive is from cinema and from cricket. And it's a very interesting story in which one of the characters, his mother dies. And then these people are living in a world of make believe. From reality, they are escaping into the world of cricket and the world of cinema. And they give themselves names also, which are from borrowed from cinema. One is called Pedro, the other one is a Tarzan, and the third has an aspiration to become a doctor, which he never does. So he's called Doctor. So they reflect the kind of situation in Kashmir when there are no avenues for development, when education is free, but without, you see, kind of that kind of content which could give people confidence to face their future. So these are the middle period, I should say. And then also the major thing that happened in 90 when the you see when militancy made its appearance in Kashmir, the gun came, and the whole Kashmiri Pandit population had to flee in terror. And then you have stories which talk about this particular tragedy, but again you find that there is no pettiness and there is no kind of a what should I say bitterness about it. There is suffering, of course, but there is an overarching humanity in these stories, like the story of the moss floating on the river stream, in which this person, one Kashmiri Pandit who has gone away to Jammu, hears about the death of his Muslim friend's son. Then he can't resist himself. He comes back, even though it is dangerous, And then he realizes how much suffering the Muslims in Kashmir Valley have undergone. You see, and that means that both the communities have suffered equally. And you see, this kind of compassionate view, I thought, is a reflection of the basic nature of a Kashmiri. And then also you have this very nice story by Dheeba Nazir in the end, which is also a kind of a celebration of humanity in the sense that this Kashmiri Pandit boy comes back looking for his foster sister, Muslim, because he is getting married and he wants to invite her. And again, these are stories which talk about sort of bridges being built between communities, understanding, empathy. So I thought that let the world know what Kashmiris are actually like.
So, thank you for such a elaborative discussion. I'd like to go back on the title of one of the story to Slavery Born. This very
Yes,
interesting
yes.
title, and this is by Bansi Nirdosh. So, what's the
Once in it.
outline of Slavery Born? Because
What
it's
was that?
again,
Beg
yeah,
your pardon? What is
Slavery Born by Bandi
once,
Nirdosh.
once, haha.
Yes,
What do you
yes.
want
So
to
what?
know?
And I'm saying that what's the extract of this story, because this title is very much contextual to the scenario of the Kashmir.
But this is you can put it in a wider sense, but this is typically about the generation gap. Here is this elderly gentleman who has been working, slogging all his life, and then suddenly he gets the news that his son has got a job. So he comes very proudly to the office where he's been working for many years. He says, now I'm going to retire because you see, now I can do other things because my son has got a job now. So everybody bids him farewell, they wish him well, and he's so delighted that the slavery that he was doing all these years is over. But
So
then
the
next morning he comes back to the office. So they wonder what's happened. What has happened is that his son has got his salary, but he says he has spent it all on buying a new set of clothes for himself, new pair of shoes and everything. So the father is left back to his own devices. So it is about him that he is a man to slavery born. He can't shed the shackles of slavery. He has to work and slog. It's more a kind of a human story of expectations and from between generations and how they can think differently. The priorities are different. And there is another story also, which is actually of today, of what shall I say, something relevant to the whole world. That is the story by Avtar Kishan Rahbar, which is called Anguish.
anguish, yes,
You remember that? Anyway,
yes,
in that also there is this Kashmiri gentleman
yeah.
who has lived in America, made a very great success of it. The typical of Kashmiris who go abroad and succeed and everything. Then he comes back, nostalgia brings him back, and then he sees the state of the river, which was pristine and clean and everything when he was a child. And now, after the gap of some few decades, he sees it's become like a drain. He can't imagine that this was the place where he would bathe every day, where water he could drink. And then he remembers that the Americans are so impressed by India and they talk about how great, you see, civilization and how perfect, pristine the waters of rivers are. And actually, this man's name is Trilokinath. And the American professor knows the meaning of Triloki. He says, oh, you are the lord of all the three uh, worlds.
Three, yeah,
So you
three.
can do anything. So when he sees the state of the river, he feels that he should have been like Shiva, who could drink up all the poison that, purify this water. So these are of universal, concern, these stories.
And if we go to the story, that is by Sufi Ghulam Muhammad, the Paper Tigers. What is
Yes,
the
yes.
message coming up from the Paper Tigers?
Mhm. You see,
Sufi
here is
Ghulam,
this. Yes. Sufi Ghulam
So,
Ahmad's Paper Tiger.
yeah,
Actually, it's about it's set in a baker's shop. In Kashmir, a baker is a very important institution.
yeah. Baking is
Every
a integral part of Kashmir, I think, and
Yes,
this has,
every mohalla has a baker. Every
yeah,
morning, people go to him and buy different kinds of breads, chochvor, lavas, girdar, all they have different names. And so he is a very important person in the mohalla. And here is this fellow, this baker, who has employed two people, two, three people, to do all the horrible work of working in the underground cellar kind of a place where there is the tandoor, and they are miserable, and he pays them a pittance, and he every time they ask for money he says this, now I'm deducting all this from your salary. So in their misery, they are, you see, they're not even conscious of the suffering they have going. They, you can say that they are so used to being exploited that they think that this is their normal state. But into this menagerie comes an outsider who's then asked, who starts working, and then because he's had a slight kind of an exposure to the rest of the world, he realizes that they are living like worse than animals. They paid nothing, and the conditions in which they live underneath the, you see, planks of the main shop, while the uh, baker is making so much money and acquiring a name for himself, these people are like nothing on earth. They are working like worms underneath. So he tries to conscientize them. He tries to tell them that, look, why do you accept all this kind of thing? You should rise in revolt. But this exploiter, let's say the owner of the shop, has a trick or two up his sleeve. So in fact, instead of, you see, letting this outsider breed too much discontent in his employees, he finds a way to get rid of him, and the others they revert back to their state, even though they have found their voice for a little while. And then this fellow, when he's dismissed, he goes out, and most of his anger is directed not to the shop owner, but to these creatures who are happy in their situation and who are afraid to raise their voice. And he calls them, I tried to do my best, but you have no substance. Sorry. And that is the story. It's a kind of an ironical situation where people refuse to really do anything to change their situation in life because they are so steeped in ignorance and so used to being exploited. And that is that's the story you were
thank you,
asking.
Prof. Thank you, Prof. Prof. Neerja, as you know, that Kashmir is enriched by its beauty, its nature, its culture, its literary contribution, and among one of them, you see the mysticism, either coming from Hindu sources or coming from Muslim sources. Both has enriched the history and the heritage of Kashmir, the living heritage of Kashmir.
Yes,
If you
yes,
go by, and Sufism is one of its integral component on
yes,
which the many stories of the Kashmir has been set around. Without Sufism, sometime we cannot imagine of Kashmir. And
quite.
to extent, I would like to say, even in the trouble time, it's like a pivot that hold the two communities together.
Yes,
The
even now.
moment when it was tarnished by terrorism, when it was tarnished by extremism, this is the core essence of Sufism that try to hold on the communities of Kashmir coming from diverse sources.
Yes,
So you have one story, The Beggar at Dargah by Taj Begum Rinzu. So how far this story is connecting the dargahs and connecting the culture of Sufism in this story?
actually, you see, this story, Taj Begum Renzu also wrote in the 50s. And this story is not so much about the dargah as about the beggars. And even though it is the title is dargah, but the emphasis is on the beggars.
Okay.
It's their miserable condition, and also that there are these women and there are little stories about how they have ended up here. And also, you can see that in this. little group of women and men, beggars at the dargah. Because dargahs are the place where all these beggars congregate. I think that happens everywhere. In Delhi also,
Even
Nizamuddin will
today at
go
Nizamuddin, or if you go to Ajmer, you
wherever.
will find
You
diverse
will
varieties of
find.
beggars coming from
So
different
this is
sources,
true of
different backgrounds.
Kashmir also. And then she just goes, tries to sort of investigate, finds their little stories and how they have all ended up here. And she finds that these women, but in particular, are victims of patriarchy, whether they have been living in the society outside or even when they are part of this band of beggars. Here is one fellow who has become the kind of a master, and he extracts money from them. He treats them so badly, and yet you see they have no choice but to be there. It's one of the uh, what should I say, most realistic descriptions of the unfortunate people who are driven to being a beggar outside of Dargah. The emphasis is not on Dargah,
Yeah,
emphasis is
but
on the.
everything has a good facet and bad facet. So when we come about dargahs, definitely this gives solace to many people. But some sort
Yes,
of forced begging, we can say this
I
this
know.
this
You
is a
see,
sort of
it's a kind of an ironical thing.
yeah, 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 and
And also, I must tell you, when you are talking about Sufism, you can
yeah,
find it in the poetry of these mystic poets,
yeah.
whether men or women.
Your other
It's a
title, that's the
kind of
core
a
of the
complete syncretic idiom they use. You see, this Robbawani, or some of her verses are so much like a Sufi kind of ecstasy, state of ecstasy that the Sufis talk about. And Laldet is, of course, she has had close connections with Nundrishi, that is Sheikh Nuruddin Durrani, who founded the order of Kashmir. And there are still people who are in the same kind of a thing. They also are rishis, and they believe in uh, Laldet also, because Laldet was very close to them, and she's supposed to have interacted with Sayyid Ali Hamadani as well as this Nundrishi. And therefore, there is this, they converge. A lot of the stuff is the same almost. Because you see, they believe in love, they believe in you see, love for the common man. They don't believe in any kind of hierarchies. So, this is something common to both you see, what should I call the Shaivite mystic poets as well as the Sufi mystic poets. And the idiom they use is almost interchangeable. If you read any of the later Sufi poets, you will be amazed. They refer to Hindu mythology very comfortably. They talk about how it is necessary to do meditation, and that meditation is like the yogic practices also. And they talk about all this. In that sometimes it's difficult to tell whether it is written by a shallow mystic or a Sufi mystic.
So, Prof, I think we have talked. This is really a collection of 25 stories, and we have talked about 35 minutes. So, I would like to just reflect a little bit on your journey of translation, because collecting these different stories and putting it at one place, how far you are a first Kashmiri speaker and you are a linguistically English professor. So, how far you find this work, and how far this was journey goes on while you are
Actually,
doing.
you see, I think, you see, because I was used to the two languages. You see, at home, when I was growing up, we spoke Kashmiri at home. But my father was a professor of English, and I had two older brothers who were considerably older than me. So they used to be conversing in English all the time. And my father was very keen on listening to the BBC radio. So we were exposed to the English language. So it was not like a foreign language, because you see, then when we went to college or university, and this is the language that was being spoken. And then I realized that if I thought a little, it was possible to think in the two languages simultaneously. So even when I was still a student, uh, I had my father's friend. He was also a scholar who had done a lot of work in Kashmiri literature as well as English. Professor Jalal Kaul was his name. He gave me one of these Kashmiri short stories that were written at that time, and he said, "Why don't you translate it?" Because so I did it, and he was very happy. He sent it to this Sahitya Academy, and they published it in their contemporary Indian stories way back in late 50s, I think. And I got some money also, so I was thrilled. And he said, "You are doing a good job, so you can continue." So I don't find that you see the act of translating from Kashmiri into English difficult because they, as I told you, it automatically I can find an equivalent. I'm not perfect, but it is not much of a labor for me. It comes automatically. And I think that your intuition is your best guide. If you think a particular word is right, it turns out to be actually right. And also, you see, in the beginning, when I started thinking of publishing a book, The Stranger Beside Me in 94, at that time I was lucky that most of the people whom I translated were still alive. So I would send the draft to the author, ask for their opinion. So only when they said they were fine with it would I go on. So I thought that was but the act of translating poetry was a bit difficult. I thought I couldn't do it, so I came to it much later. But then I thought, because I had taught English and I was aware of English poetry, meter and other things, and rhythms and rhymes, so I thought I might as well attempt it. So my translation of Lalted follows the original Kashmiri meter that she uses. See, four stresses on every line. So that is how I do it, so that at least the appearance seems to be the same. And I try to choose the right idiom, and I check it out sometimes with people who I think I know better. So that's how I do it. But for me, translation is not so difficult, really. Either it comes uh, immediately or it doesn't come at all.
Just before closing, a concluding remark from your side, I would like to. What is take-home message you would like to give? Because you know the Kashmir is something. There is really a lot of things that are not going good at the place, and Kashmiris are the one who are the recipient of all these sufferings. And above it, it's rich culture, it's rich heritage, it's rich literature. So, anyone who is not aware about the Kashmiri culture, what take-home message you would like to give as a literary person who is contributing very actively to the literary aspect of Kashmir?
I would ask them, you see, to talk to Kashmiris. Don't only come as tourists swayed by the beauty of Kashmir and everything. Try to probe a little deeper, ask people what they feel, and sort of get to know them. Don't think of them as a stranger beside you, but as someone who is like you, who also has the same aspirations, who also has the same kind of ambitions, who also suffers in the same way, and who has probably suffered much more than most other people in different ways. So I would like them to know Kashmiris rather than Kashmir, because like that they can't really get a good idea. So I think we deserve to be understood better by the rest of the mainland.
So that's a humanistic and the living aspect of Kashmir that needs to be more explored. Need to be get more explored. Need to be
Yes.
looked with the different and diverse perspectives, other than only one or unilateral thought that is
No,
more
no, of
privileged.
course, there is no one reality. You
Yeah,
have to
there is.
have a kind of a Rashomon type of mind, that there can
Yes,
be so many versions of reality, and all of them can be authentic also in different
exactly.
ways. So you have to get the whole picture. Don't be like that, the blind men of Hindustan who were trying to describe what an elephant is like.
Exactly,
Who
exactly.
are
Exactly, exactly. So, Professor Neerja, just before going back, I would like to know just little bit the evolution of Kashmiri language. Like different languages, we have Urdu, that coming up from a diverse sources: Arabic, Hindustani, Sanskrit, and mixture of Persian. So, how far the Kashmiri is influenced by regional and other influences?
Kashmiri, actually, you see, basic grammatic structure is from Sanskrit
Yes,
because
Sanskrit
we
is a
have the
baseline.
same.
Sanskrit is a
Beg
baseline
your
for that.
pardon? Yes, basic is. But then our vocabulary is enriched by all languages. And Kashmiris have this wonderful habit of absorbing things because we have always thought that we don't know enough, we have to learn. We are not arrogant people. We have a certain sense of humility and we accept the goodness of people. Unless, of course, people thrust things on us, we are ready to accept things by our own volition. So our language is full of the vocabulary is Persian, Arabic, English, but only we try and pronounce them in their own way and they become a part of the language. But as I told you that it's also influenced by Dandic languages, by some Prakrit words and things,
Yeah.
but and it has been enriched by the poets who have written from, who have borrowed from Sanskrit, from Persian, from Arabic, as I told you, and so the language is very rich, and the idioms are so colorful and wonderful, and the proverbs are so what shall I say, appropriate to all occasions. And they are also, like little metaphors in themselves. And Lalita is a main contributor to the vocabulary because she's like Shakespeare in the sense that she developed the language by using words and transforming them into a Kashmiri version also. Like Sanskrit words are used, but they are given a completely Kashmiri pronunciation.
Kashmiri
Like you see,
pronunciation.
if, yes, like so you might not, you see in Sanskrit there is no z or ts
Yeah.
or th, but
Yes, yes.
all the Sanskrit origin words in Kashmiri become z. Jal becomes zal, like
Zen.
that.
Yes,
And
yes.
this is a Persian influence or whatever. The Kashmiri language is very rich and colorful and everything, and it's possible to express anything, any emotion. If you have to look at the poetry of these four women poets, and you will see the rich vocabulary. And also this unself-conscious absorption from other languages.
Thank you, Professor Neerja, for this wonderful and amazing session. Really, it's a great pleasure for us and for
Thank,
me especially to host you
thank
on
you
this.
very much. Thank you very much for allowing me to speak at length and speak frankly.
That's
And
great.
anyway,
That's great.
okay.
Thank you.